think we're ready to move on to the next presentation, which is called Insights, What Employees Are Saying About How Recovery-Ready Workplaces Can Change Lives. So I'm happy to introduce two presenters for the session. First is Lynn Sanders, who is the Director of Economic Development for the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation, where she brings years of experience and passion to her commitment to address systemic inequality and advance economic and social justice through innovative job training and youth development programs. And we'll also be joined by Douglas Ward, a Boston-based business owner who's been in recovery for 17 years. MRC supported his pursuit of higher education and his employment as a case manager at a number of human service organizations. He now owns and operates his own demolition business, managing a staff of 7. And Doug has the added distinction of having received education and training from MRC, which I could not be happier about, Doug. It's my pleasure to introduce Lynn Sanders and Doug Ward.
Everybody, really good to speak with you today. I am Lynn Sanders, as introduced. I'm an alcoholic, and I have been in recovery and sober for almost 8 years. As mentioned, I'm currently the Director of Economic Development for Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston, and I oversee a team of 5 staff and a range of programs and services, including career readiness, digital skills, small business support, financial capability, and housing stability programs. I've also lived in Dorchester for 10 years now. And I would say in terms of, talking a little bit about my career and my recovery and how work has been really important to that, I would say I feel like work has always been really important and central in my life. I'm very much like a type A personality, overachiever, and always been focused on and very after school, like getting straight A's, then straight to being focused on like being a real high achiever in the workplace. So in my career as a public servant, I've always been very focused on mission-driven work, and as mentioned in the introduction, like getting folks access to economic justice and in different venues, and that's often included folks who are in recovery being a part of more job opportunities and access to services, and I think that has been central to my meaning and purpose and identity. And I know that my drinking and my substance use really had a big impact on that. It was very detrimental to my ability to be productive at work. Consistent lateness, absences, general underperformance, and eventually, losing a job. Not long after having completed my graduate degree and also buying my first home. So that was, a lot of economic anxiety that came from that as well. I was lucky while I was still struggling with alcohol to be able to get another job. That was sort of on my career trajectory, but like maybe a step down from what I had before, I'll say. And then, really fear of losing that job was a big motivator in my recovery. I was written up at work, and it, had been very much in denial, and it really hit me. I could lose my career that I have worked very hard for, and I needed to make the change. So once I was sober, I was not at all open about it in my workplace. No one was aware of that initially when I when I started my recovery, but I was really lucky to have a supervisor who was very supportive of my professional growth, and also, I would say, had a very empathetic and human-centered approach to managing people. So she really allowed me to continue to grow, and provided flexibility that I needed at times when I was struggling, and especially in very early sobriety. While also, continuing to hold me accountable for everything I was responsible for. And, when it was clear that I couldn't grow in that job anymore, and I wanted to start looking for another position to move forward in my career, I was incredibly anxious about the idea of that. I, thought I was going to be interviewing, and somehow people were going to have found out about my issues with alcohol, or somehow it was going to create a problem in the job search. So I was hesitant to apply for a lot of positions that I was interested in, but eventually I did apply for a role with the city of Boston for the mayor's office of workforce development, which at the time, then Mayor Welsh was very open about his story and his struggle with alcoholism, and having someone in a leadership position in the organization you're applying for, I think, is a really big help to feeling like that people might get it, even if they did somehow know that it's not going to be, if Mayor Walsh can be elected mayor, then someone else in recovery can certainly work in his administration. So, I think that helped me really get a job where I continue to advance. I got 2 promotions within 2 years. And then I would say kind of got to a place again where I felt like there wasn't really room for growth in my career, and ended up applying for the job that I have now with Codman Square NDC. And this is really the first my first place of employment where I have been very open about the fact that I'm a person in recovery, that I have been 8 years sober, with both my supervisor and my colleagues. And I would say, like, similar to everything I've heard today has been really exciting in talking about this stuff. And similar to this Ted Wayman sharing his story, I would say, the pandemic really had a big impact on me in thinking about wanting to be more open about my recovery, and working to reduce the stigma, and knowing that other people are struggling. And I know a lot of people were really struggling in isolation at that time. That you can move beyond your substance use disorder, and you can have a successful career and continue to excel, and just generally have like a fulfilled life. And yeah, I think I would also add, I really enjoyed the discussion about having a more, I will say, like, human-centered workplace that's good for everyone. Most of us are in our jobs 40 hours a week, and we deserve to be able to bring our full selves to work, and to be able to open up about who we are, and not feel like stressed out about like trying to, like, you're trying to hide something. I wanted to be here today to, encourage employers to embrace being open about talking to people about what they're struggling with too, and approach work and your employees with flexibility, empathy, but also, maintaining accountability and just generally trying to understand employees as whole people. And I think that would really improve the success of people in recovery, but also everyone in general, like all employees could do with a little more of that. So guess that is my story, and I can pass it on to Doug to talk to us about his story.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. Just real quickly, I got involved with MRC back in '95. I was newly in recovery, and there was a huge wave of people talking about going back to school. I kept hearing about, you can go back to school. You can go to UMass. Go down to the Mass Rehab Commission to help you with funding to go back to school. And there was a lot of people at the time doing this. I mean, when I say there was a huge wave of us, people who were just kind of like trying to find something to do, looking for some sort of direction. And when I got newly in recovery, granted, I was in recovery, but I really didn't have any direction at the time. I was just pretty much happy to be in recovery, and that was great all by itself. But the opportunity to go to school was exciting. So I went down and applied. The person that told me about the Mass Rehab Commission said, all I needed to do was be in recovery and have a high school diploma or GED, and that they were going to help me, go to UMass and get my bachelor's degree. And at the time, being financially in bad shape, that was a win-win situation. So I ran down there and applied. Just to fast forward, I got accepted. Just watching my stop clock. I got accepted. I filled some paperwork. Maybe answer some questions. Show some credentials. I had a GED at the time, and I had an associate's from Cape Cod Community College. I took the entrance, placement stuff at UMass Boston. Got accepted. And had a start date. So I just want to just touch on this about the MRC, how crucial and how important and how valuable it was for me and people like me that were all embarking on this new journey, right? First of all, it paid the tuition, which was huge. I remember when I was in my community college and having to fill out financial aid forms and always stressing about, was I going to have enough money for this semester, for next semester? Just to fast forward, they paid the entire bill, which was like heaven sent. They gave me a book voucher, to buy my books, and I went into human services, and all these books that I had to have for classes, they were really thick, expensive books. I remember they were thick, and I remember they were expensive. And I remember thinking, like, how much of a struggle it would have been at the time, because I was financially, I wasn't doing great at all. How much of a struggle it would have been just to get the books, never mind the tuition being paid. So the tuition was paid, they paid for the books, and they even gave me a combo MBTA pass, you know what I mean? So I could travel to and from school for free, not just to and from school, just to and from on the MBTA period. So, I was really excited, and I was overwhelmed with joy. Again, I embarked on this in '95. So we're talking, 25, 26, maybe 27 years ago, trying to get my math straight, but a long time ago. And when I was asked to do this, I had to go back into my memory bank and try to feel the feelings that I was feeling back then, because I haven't felt those particular feelings in a long time, because this happened a long time ago in my life. And as I sat there in that moment of being a part of the Mass Rehab Commission and going to UMass Boston for the very first day and having this financial assistance, I remember just this feeling of gratitude, like, you know, they had given me a chance at life. So when I went to school, because I was given this chance, I moved a little different. My energy was a little different. I was coming from a place of enthusiasm, excitement, and I was gung-ho. And, you know, I already had an associate's degree and I was going to go to school and I was going to kick some butt. So at the time, you know, full-time was 4 classes. So, you know, I said, I'm going to do 7. And I registered for all 7. And about the second week, I hit this wall. And it wasn't because it was a wall that, you know, I was thinking about, you know, quitting. That wasn't the wall. The wall was like, how am I going to do all this work? Because I hadn't been in school in a long time. And it came so fast and it came so hard and it just came so quickly. The teachers passed out a syllabus. The syllabus was just the course outline, and the course outline was thick, you know, read 30 pages for next class. I was just a mess. So not only did Mass Rehab help me with, you know, with the financial stuff, you know, I remember going back to my case worker at the time, Miss Joan Davis, and I was explaining to her, not in tears, but very worried and concerned, like, I'm having a hard time here. So I remember, you know, getting some counseling, some vocational support, some one-on-one time, and actually what we did was, you know, in order to be a part of the program, you had to go full time, and that was 4 classes. So I was able to drop the other 3 classes without being penalized, because there was an add drop period at the time. So I dropped off the 3. I was still doing full time, and I just managed to organize myself with the help from the people in Mass Rehab, you know, helping out with a book bag. I don't know where it came from, but I ended up getting a laptop from somebody, and some counseling and some hope, and some encouragement. So here I am, you know, knocking out these 4 classes. The first semester went by, the second semester went by, the third semester was another hard semester because I had to take this computer class. So here I am again. I'm back down talking to Miss Davis. I'm like, Miss Davis, they got me in this computer room. I don't know nothing about this. They want me to play with this machine. It's driving me nuts. I want to smash it. I mean, I really wanted to put my fist through this thing every time I sat in front of it because it was so hard. It was like a brick wall. And I just remember getting the support from the Mass Rehab people. Doug, you can do it. You know, get a tutor. You know, even if you have to take it twice, we got your back. And just to fast forward, you know, I remember getting through that class. I remember getting through all my classes. And I remember graduating. I graduated in '98, and there was a bunch of us that graduated. We were all people in recovery, and we were all part of the Mass Rehab Commission. We were easily able to identify each other because a lot of us at the time, you know, being newly in recovery, you know, they used to give out keychains for length of clean time / sobriety. You know, you have a white one for when you first get there, you get a green one for 30 days, a blue one for 60. I forget the color coordination, but there's a different keychain for different lengths of time: 0, 30, 60, 90, 6 months, 9 months, a year, and then a black one for multiple years. And at the time, you know, we were so happy about being in recovery. You know, we were actually very open about being in recovery. We wore drug-free T-shirts, and we wore our little keychains to let people know we were in recovery. And, you know, there was a whole bunch of us involved at Mass Rehab, and we were able to really identify with each other and support each other. And not only did I graduate, but a whole lot of people that jumped in when I jumped in graduated as well. And that was one of my first empowerment periods of my life. Like that gave me a boost in my confidence when I finished that. I had finished something. Although I had an associate's degree, I did get that before. But this was different. This was very, you know, a hard one. It was a very hard struggle to get that bachelor's degree from UMass Boston, and I would never been able to do it without the support of the Mass Rehab Commission, who funded me financially and empowered me spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. I remember inviting everybody from the Mass Rehab down to my graduation, and you know, we had a great day. I found some employment in human services. When I graduated, my first step was I was actually working at West Roxbury District Court, and I was a liaison between West Roxbury District Court and English High School. I was doing some work in the drug court. This is all paid stuff. And I left there. I went to Just to Start Youth Build. I worked at 10 Point Coalition. I worked at Pine Street Inn. I worked at this other agency called New Generation of Grandparents. And, you know, basically, you know, giving back, you know, it was great. It was great. My time working in human services, you know, social services it was a win-win situation. I enjoyed the work. I loved working with people. I loved the feedback. I loved watching all the success stories. Somebody that spoke before me talked about, you know, opening a door and remembering, you know, the person that opened the door for them. I remember everybody who opened the door for me along the way. And I was in position when I was working in social services to help other people first find doors and then open them. Worked with a lot of people in recovery, helping them, you know, find services to get clean, and then helping them find services to stay clean, because this recovery thing, it's not a destination, it is a journey, and it's an ongoing process. And for me, it's a daily lifestyle. So I did this, you know, I worked in these social services for a long time. And just to fast forward my story, in 2005, I had a little lapse in my recovery. I had a relapse. It was devastating. It really was. And it took a lot to dust myself off. I don't even have an excuse. You know, I chose to drink again, and it was the worst mistake I ever made in my life. But I got back in recovery. I got clean and sober again. And now, just to fast forward, I'm looking at the clock. I've been down to 12 minutes. I got 8 more. I'm watching time. I got clean again in April 20th of 2005. My grandmother passed away November, the day after Thanksgiving in 2010. I'm actually having an anniversary soon of her loss. Anyway, when she passed away, she had left me $13,000. And prior to her passing away, I was doing some odds and ends types of stuff with some people who, they're little, you know, contractors, you know, a plumber, a mason, a tile guy, a floor guy, you know, guy who did carpet. I found myself without a job, and I was doing this odds and ends stuff for these other people. So I got this money from my grandmother, and you know, my son and I, you know, we decided we were going to try to open, you know, a little business. You know, what we're going to do, you know. So we bought a truck, we made some walls in the truck, and we started doing junk removal. A lot of it too, actually. You know, cleaning out houses, basements. Again, you know, back in you know, 2010, 2012, you know, the economy was a little different. Things were really moving. It's kind of booming, actually. Got beat up in the beginning. I didn't know how to price things out, but I stayed with it. And I kept doing it. And then one day somebody asked me to do a kitchen. Somebody said, hey, can you demo this bathroom? I didn't know anything about demoing the bathroom, but the guy that I was working with, he knew a lot about stuff. So, you know, we demoed the bathroom together. We demoed the kitchen together. One guy said, can you demo, you know, strip this roof? I didn't know anything about going up on the roof and with ladders and stripping shingles. But, you know, once I figured it out, you know, I figured it out. You know, we had to dismantle a single porch. Then we had to dismantle a 3-family porch. We had to dig out a basement, take up all these different little jobs. They were very selective demo jobs. Nothing was big. It's just a small little job, but I for some reason, kept getting so many of them. I think the people that I was working for were giving my name out to other people, because I never really had to advertise too much. I just kind of word of mouth kind of stuff. Anyway, I met I call him, I guess maybe my mentor. He was a general contractor, and he called me on a Craigslist ad that I had posted up, and he wanted me to come look at this job in Jamaica Plain. I almost didn't go because it was late. I said, well, when can we, come look at it? She said, well, can you come now? So I went and looked at the job, and just to fast forward, I got this job. It was my first big job. It was a 3-family house, full gut, 3 porches, 2 chimneys, had to dig out the basement, had to strip the entire house. I mean, it was huge. It was my first big job. I mean, it was humongous, so we, I gave him a price. We went back and forth a little bit, not too much, I went here, he went here. And I had heard in business, when you're here and they're there, very gracefully say, well, can we meet in the middle? So I hit him with the meet in the middle, and he was a little reluctant because I guess my price was a little too high. He's like, Doug, let's do it. So I did this job, and just to fast forward things up to today, I annihilated it. I'm a person in recovery, and we do make great employees. I was so grateful and happy to finally be getting a big job like this. I mean, I went in there with my shoulder, and I just smashed it to bits. Had a good crew. We annihilated the whole job, clean as a whistle, no complaints, and we did it faster than the guy wanted us to. We were on a schedule. We beat the scheduled date. And I remember, being in this place, maybe 7 o'clock at night, and I'm cleaning the building. The guy owes me the last check, and the last check is all mine. I paid all the bills, and for the first time, my son and I, we saw that we had made a couple of bucks. I mean, we were elated. Like, wow, we made a couple of bucks on this one. The ones before that, we just kind of whatever, but this one we had made a couple of bucks on it. So I'm in this building, I'm cleaning the building out, got my coffee and stuff, and I feel these eyes on me in the back, and I look behind me, and it's the guy that I'm doing the job for. He's like, Doug, what are you doing? I said, I'm cleaning. He's like, no, Doug, the place is clean enough. Go home. You're all done. I said, no, I'm not done. He says, what do you mean? I says, you want me to tell you the truth? He says, always tell me the truth. I said, I'm not leaving until this place is so clean that the next time you get a big job like this, if you don't at least let me come look at it, it's going to hurt your feelings. So he laughed and he walked away, said, do your thing, Doug. And he left. So I finished doing what I was doing, and I left. And when I walked out the door, my last check was on the door. He had taken a nail and just put my last check on the door. And just to fast forward, this guy that I'm talking about, his name is Matthew. He has his business. It's called Silver Tree Development. Now, it was called Straight Up Development, but he changed the name. He's a monster. What I mean by monster, he's super busy. My son and I, we get 60% of our work comes from this one person. The other 40% comes from people that, we've met along the way. And it's been a win-win situation. I mean, other people I work for, they might develop 1 or 2 houses during the course of the year. This guy would do 30. And that's not even humanly possible, but he does it. I want to say he's a workaholic, but he's really not, because he's a family person too. He just knows how to balance himself really good. Anyway, I've been working for this guy. We've been doing this business for over 12 years now. Have a small crew of guys. And all my crew members they're all people in recovery. I just found them along the way, going to AA and NA meetings. And it's been a real good situation. The people that that are in recovery, not only do we work hard, but we work hard, we're loyal, we're dedicated, and we move different. We have a different energy. It doesn't make us better than somebody who's not in recovery, but some of us are coming from a place of nothingness. We're coming from a place of nothingness. So given an opportunity to shine, it's been my experience that we do shine. I'll just speak for myself. And it's been a great experience so far. I would highly recommend hiring people in recovery. They're loyal assets, and given an opportunity, they're going to do great. In closing, I just want to say I'm really glad that the panel asked me to come speak. I was really nervous about speaking. When I look back on those days of my time at Mass Rehab over 5 years ago, it definitely helped me get to the next level. I mean, it gave me an opportunity to get my bachelor's degree. It gave me an opportunity to build my confidence up to shine, and I'm still shining now. Things are quiet. My life is quiet. I'm in recovery. I'm a man in recovery. I don't have any ripples in my pond. I stay in my lane. I stay out of trouble. I stay clean and sober no matter what. And I keep myself surrounded by people that are like-minded and doing the same thing. And so far it's working. And I think that's my time. That's 20 minutes. Thank you for having me on the board. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. And thank you, Lynn. That was great. We do have a few questions, but I just want to say before we start with them that, I said this, I think, in the comments, it really takes courage to speak about personal issues in public settings like this. And it's amazing. You're helping other people. You're helping people in recovery. You're helping employers and all of us really understand more about the perspective of people in recovery by sharing these really personal stories. And thank you for that. It's deeply appreciated. Just wanted to ask, a question came up for Lynn, I think, because you talked a little earlier about, type A and wanting to get, get A's and moving ahead in your career. In terms of your employment, when you think about and your career, why do you think it's so important to you, and how has recovery influenced your employment and your employment influenced your recovery?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think employment, I feel like it gives life, like day-to-day life, meaning. And I really chose to be in a career that's very, like, I'm very personally passionate about the work. I think in times when I was struggling, I felt like I didn't genuinely do that and put forth the effort I could to sort of serve my community and support folks to have better opportunities. So I think it was important to me to get back to a place where I felt like I was contributing in that way, and doing all I could. I guess I think there's a kind of a bit of a back and forth between, like, what recovery means to work and what work. They're both like such huge parts of my life, I think. And I will also say, being a type A, bringing that up, like, I definitely, as a part of my recovery, have like struggled with a bit of workaholism. And that, I'll say again, particularly during the pandemic, like that, recognizing the same impulse there, and the need to balance that and have other things in my life that are also meaningful and not just work. But yeah, I think there's consistently an interplay between those things. But I feel like my recovery also informs I am a manager. I manage a small team of 5 people. So in terms of, I think what I mentioned a lot, I talk about empathy a lot, but I just think it's hugely important to know and understand the people that you're working with. And, like, I know it was discussed quite a bit earlier too, like that people are sometimes afraid of crossing certain lines and knowing that. But I think just, treating employees like human beings is where to start.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn. And this question is really for both of you. You know, and we've heard the phrase, and we're hearing a lot just in the work floor, the whole workforce crisis that is going on not only in Massachusetts but around the country, around how do you recruit and retain employees that people want to bring their whole self to work. They want to be themselves. They want that inclusive workplace where they can be their genuine, authentic selves. So, for both of you, Doug and Lynn, when you look back on your own experience, what helped or what could have helped you in terms of your workplace experience as a person in recovery, in early recovery, currently in your, long-term recovery, what helped you to bring your whole self to work and feel comfortable and maintain your recovery, and what could have been better? So I don't, Doug, you want to start? You're unmuted, so why don't you start?
Okay. For me, it's all about transparency. When I early on in business, especially when I met this guy that I do most of my work for, it's really about just being, transparency. He's high octane. He wanted to work Saturdays and Sundays. He'd work until 8, 9 o'clock at night if he could. And I kind of had to let him know, I need Saturdays and Sundays off. I need my weekends for my mental health time. I really can't work past 6 o'clock. I said the word groups. I have to go to my groups at night, and it's funny. It wasn't until like maybe 5 years after working for this guy that it came out that I'm a person in recovery. I'm not sure if I initiated or he said something, but it came out. It verbally came out of my mouth. I'm a person in recovery, and come to find out he is too. I thought that was awesome. So, just the transparency part, being upfront about, appointments, things that I have to do on a personal level. I know when I first got into recovery, a lot of things that were important were taking care of my health, getting my eyes checked, going to the dentist for the first time in a long time. So just having some transparency and some movability to, make my appointments and, work, but also do some self-help care stuff too, because at the time, especially early on, it was important.
That's great. Lynn, anything to add about what helped or what would have helped more to support you?
Yeah, I'll echo what Doug said. I think that transparency and like trust are hugely important. I think kind of repeating what I said before, but really, genuinely showing an interest in getting to know me as an employee, or as a human being, but like, and sharing parts in that, that if an employer shares things about themselves and makes a workplace feel more like a place where we are just ourselves and we're doing our jobs as opposed to just doing the job only. I think that is really important. And I will say, I think Doug touched on it, but like just generally having comprehensive benefits and things that people so people can access the appropriate behavioral health care, all of that, and have flexibility to go to appointments, and acknowledging that's a part of life and people need to do that, which sounds basic, but I know there are some employers who don't really do that.
Yeah. And that speaks to, I think, what we heard about in the recovery ready workplace and what Dana and Steve talked about earlier about sort of that universal design that can help all employees, because honestly, we all should be going to doctors to take care of ourselves and appointments and have self-care where we don't work. As Doug said, I need to, have the weekends off. So it's a great point. Lynn, this question, since you mentioned that this was one of the first jobs you've had where you've been open about your status as a person in recovery, how did your employer and coworkers react to that when you've been honest about it? And what is there anything you've already said some of these things, but is there anything that happened that made you feel that this was a safe place to do that?
Yeah, I think, well, everyone who I work with, who I've said it to, same as pretty much everyone in my life who I've said it to, is very proud of me and thinks that, my 8 years of sobriety is a great accomplishment. Yeah, I think people are often surprised because they I don't know, they expect a certain image of who they think of when they think of people with a substance use problem, and I don't necessarily fit that. I would say in terms of, I'm sorry, what was the other part of the question?
What made it feel safe, or what could make it safe for someone to feel that comfortable to disclose that kind of information?
Yeah, I'll say, well, I don't know. I feel like I probably should have felt safe in my other workplaces. I think the fact that I have, generally worked in kind of in public service and in nonprofit organizations with kind of everybody in the room has a more progressive leaning and is very open about these things. I maybe could have felt comfortable to do that sooner. But I feel like, one of the things that made me feel comfortable was I guess the people I work with now. It does, I would say that the environment is kind of more familial. If people are more open and bring their personal lives into work. And everybody seems to know each other in a more authentic way than, kind of, again, surface level, just talk about our job employment relationship. So I that definitely made me feel comfortable.
Thanks. And I'm just thinking, Doug, about the experience you just related, that you got to the point of feeling comfortable for asking what you need around setting boundaries, and you mentioned groups, and then you come to find out that the person that you'd known for all these years himself was in recovery, and that made the connection stronger. So I wonder if both of you could think a little bit about, is there any advice? You both manage people, but put your just employee hat on here. Is there any advice that you would give to employees, to people who either are struggling, they're working somewhere with a substance use disorder, or they're in recovery, maybe they're an MRC consumer or not an MRC consumer, just out there looking for a job, looking for a better job, about any of this? Just what advice would you give in terms of their employment and their recovery journey? I know that's a very broad question.
Who should go first?
Oh, Doug, you can, because you're on mute.
Okay. All right. So it goes back to the gentleman that I heard speaking before us that said something along the lines of This isn't a charity situation between employer and employees. This is about honesty. Going into the situation, honest. So as an employee, the person looking for work, that person needs to for lack of a better term, first of all, have their head on straight, have to have some level of focused, and also have to understand that we all live in the real world where this bread and butter thing is very, very important. There's demands, there's deadlines, and work is work. Somebody in business once told me a long time ago, the nature of business is business. So I think as in a person looking for work, an employee looking for work, you have to, go into that workplace environment with that sort of attitude, like, yeah, okay, I am looking for a job and I am looking for an opportunity, but at the same time, I need to bring my A game as well. I need to be fresh in the morning. I need to have taken a shower the night before. I need to have fresh clothes on and fresh attire, and I don't need to go to work smelling like alcohol, because that's not realistic. How am I going to ask somebody for an opportunity when I'm not even working toward having an opportunity? You have to put yourself in a position to ask for help first. You got to be in a position because you want to receive the help. So you can't ask for help if you're not in position. I'll just say this and be quiet. When I ride by Mass Ave or some other place and somebody asks me for money, I'm very reluctant to give, because I'm just a little reluctant. But when somebody comes to my job site, needing an opportunity, and I can tell that they're at least trying, then I'm more open. My son and I, we get guys for extra work. We have extra work meetings sometimes. We go to halfway houses and recruit guys all the time. And it's a different type of giving, because they're in position where they're trying to get things in a better situation. So I think people are more apt to help you when they see you're making some effort, as opposed to staggering into the job site smelling like booze. That's not realistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So take care of the personal and the professional, and put your best.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Any advice that you would give, Lynn, if you were talking to somebody?
Yeah, I would say, also echoing what Doug said about honesty and, putting your best foot forward. But I think it was discussed earlier, honesty to the level with which you can feel comfortable in the environment, depending on what you know about your employer and all that. I think, honesty with discretion, I guess I'll say. But I would also say just that, for someone who is struggling, I don't want to sound too cheesy, but like that you can be successful and that there is hope, and like looking, when you're in the struggle, it feels like it's hard to see that sometimes. So, and that's part of why I'm here, and is look to other people, and not just folks with like substance use issues, but like certainly mental health issues, any other kind of struggles. I think we all know that we all have things that we're going through, and just like don't give up.
Great. Don't give up, have hope. Any one last question. So we just asked about what advice would you give employees? You're both managers. Doug, you're a small business owner. What advice would you give employers? You're both employed now. Doug, you mentioned you hired people in recovery. As we've made the point, many people have someone in recovery working for them, whether they know it or not. So what advice would you give employers? You have a unique experience, both of you, as being both an employee and a supervisor. So what would you tell a supervisor? around? What should they be doing to help people?
I would say to employers that it's a good situation to hire somebody in recovery. Me personally, I wouldn't hire anybody that's in active addiction. I wouldn't do that, especially in the construction business. That's very dangerous. I don't want to hire anybody that's staggering and falling around, or anybody that's high. But it's been my experience that someone in recovery, who's in recovery, that they're awesome people to hire and people to take a risk on. You know, give it an opportunity. Even if it's just a small opportunity, you know, sometimes I pick up guys at these halfway houses. I say, listen, you know, I can use you for 30 days. After 30 days, I can't guarantee anything because I don't know what's around the corner, but I got this job right here. I'm going to need extra help for 30 days. You can come in, you make a good buck. And people have just been, you know, really grateful about that. You know, again, they have a different energy and they move a little different, you know, give it an opportunity, especially if they're come from that place of where a lot of people in recovery, sometimes, you know, we come from that place of nothingness. So anytime a door opens, no matter, you know, how big or how small, it's an opportunity to elevate oneself. And for my experience, you know, they've been really successful. I don't have any bad stories about hiring somebody in recovery. Not a one. I've had a few people come to me down the road and express some life on life term stuff where, you know, they might have needed to take some time off and you know, that's just life on life term stuff, but never had a catastrophe, not one. It's always been a good experience in my experience. Thanks.
That's great. Lynn, any thoughts, closing thoughts about, you know, as a supervisor, advice you would give for supervisors?
Yeah, I'll keep like repeating my mantra, I guess, here, but like treat people like human beings. Really allow you know, understanding, empathy, flexibility, and I think, you know, as I said earlier, you know, my career was kind of one of the primary motivator for my recovery, and you know, someone in a situation like that, and I think Doug said, coming from nothingness or the emptiness, you know, coming from a situation where you really there's nothing to lose, and to be back in a place where you're gaining stability and a job that gives you that opportunity, you're going to be the hardest worker that company has. So I say, you know, we are huge assets, and give people the opportunity.
That's great. And, you know, we do have one question that just came in. So and we have a few more minutes. And it's, I think, a great question. All the questions have been great. This person wanted to know, at what point would you consider, you or, you know, you think employers should consider someone in terms of their recovery? You know, would it be when they've been in recovery for 6 months, 1 year? Obviously, by the way, everybody, you can't ask people that question. We talked about legal issues, but I suppose if someone just closed that, you know, what's your sense? You know, Doug, you mentioned not hiring people in active recovery, but I don't know, we could start with Lynn. You know, do you have any sense of at what point, you know, assuming one could know that, even though we can't ask, what would be the time period you would look at?
I'm going to say, I don't think I can say that. I mean, I think everybody's different, and like that's yeah, I don't feel like I can put a number on it, but I think it's speaking to the person and getting a sense of where they're at in their personal life, and that they are, as Doug mentioned earlier, putting their best foot forward, and you can see that they're genuine in their commitment to it.
Great. Doug, do you have any thoughts about that? At what point, if someone disclosed their recovery status to you, of how long you would look for? Length of time in recovery?
I'm going to piggyback off of what Lynn said. I don't think there's a certain, timeline or a certain amount of days that would influence my decision about helping somebody. I think what she was referring to is it's really about the energy. When a person's right, you can feel that they're right. We can all feel things. We all have, common sense, and then we have like that sixth sense, and then we have that spidey sense, that spider sense. We can all kind of tell, where a person's at after, talking to that person, interviewing that person. So I really think it just depends on the person's energy and how they, how they come at me, how they talk to me, how they present themselves. It's pretty obvious, actually. I would think most times if somebody in recovery was asking for a job, it was because they were in position to handle that job. I don't really know too many people who are like really in active addiction who are out there actively working. They're actively doing their alcoholism and addiction things, and that's fine. I think when somebody gets into recovery and asks for a job, I think they're asking because they feel within themselves that they're ready. And if I get the same sense, I'm going to take a chance on that person. I don't know if that's just me, but I like Lynn was saying, I just give people a shot, and people will shoot their own selves in the foot, and that's a reality. That's fine too. I'd rather give somebody a shot and let them shoot themselves in the foot than I can say, well, look, this isn't working out. This is why this isn't working out, and then I don't feel so bad about the situation. Yeah, I think that the comments Lynn made, they're my comments as well.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Aaron has made a couple of points in the chat. I just wanted to mention, as I reiterating what I said, you're not allowed to ask about all this in an interview. That it, Aaron made the point, it depends on where someone is in the process of their substance use disorder and how serious or severe it is. They could be, functioning and in a job. People are often, on some kind of pain medication and have some dependence that may not be recognized. So, there are different gradations for all of this. Just FYI for folks in the audience who don't work in the treatment and recovery field, and I know in a separate part of our project with the Mass Rehab Commission, we are doing training of people with disabilities to become licensed alcohol and drug counselor, level 2 here in Massachusetts, and recovery coaches. You don't have to be in recovery to be a LADAC, licensed alcohol and drug counselor. You do have to be in recovery to be a recovery coach. But for anyone who is in recovery, we suggest to them, again, no one's asking this, that because they want to help other people in recovery, they need to really be very solid in their own recovery to be in recovery for at least a year. And I know there are a number of programs around Massachusetts who would suggest that it may be 2 years. But again, that's about helping people in the treatment field. So, different sensibilities. And as we heard from, I think, Ramona, Rebecca, and Bill, and others, Dana and Steve, hiring people in recovery gives people that sense of meaning in their life, a connection to a community. Obviously, money that can help support them and be part of the fabric of the community. So it's a really important part of recovery to help maintain recovery. So I think we're going to take a 15-minute break. When we come back, we're going to hear from 2 elected officials about what's happening at the state level in their various functions. And Lynn and Doug, thank you so much. This was amazing. Telling personal stories is difficult, and I hope that you feel really good about it because we have learned so much from you. And thank you so much.